everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to the June meeting of the Board of Early Education and Care and call the meeting to order. At the onset of the meeting, I just want to send and express some gratitude to the team at EEC. As you may recall, we did not have a May meeting really to support all of the hard work of the team as it relates to the recent RFR that went out. And so just want to say thank you to the entire team for your work in ensuring that that process went on time and as planned. And I know there was probably lots of learnings that you've had from it, but we were pleased to be able to support you in that work by giving you back that time in May. So we're happy to be here together this month with a pretty stacked agenda. And so we will jump right in, and I'll turn it over to the secretary for comments.
Are you modeling brevity and therefore suggesting that I should do the same?
You can. I followed your lead over there. You can follow my lead.
All right, very good. Well, unfortunately, I have a lot to say.
All right. Stepped right into that.
All right. The first thing I want to do is extend my congratulations to the members who I just had the privilege of swearing in. I think we all acknowledge that being a board member is a significant commitment, and you're volunteering your time for this effort. But having worked alongside the three of you over the past year and a half, I can say that I'm honored to continue forward with you. So congratulations to you. I also want to take a moment to highlight and congratulate Commissioner Kershaw, who received a National Future of Human Services Award yesterday from the American Public Health Services Association. For everyone's edification, this award recognizes state agencies or other partnerships that have demonstrated bold, visionary leadership in advancing better outcomes for children and families. It was awarded in recognition of dedicated work to reduce cliff effects, the sudden loss of public benefits families can face if they earn slightly more income, which can discourage work and hinder economic mobility. Congratulations, well deserved. The FY25 budget is on the agenda. We'll dive deeper there when we get to that point in the agenda. But I just want to take a moment and express my appreciation to the legislature publicly for their continuous support for all sectors of education, but early education and care in particular. As we know, in sort of typical fashion, we expect that process to conclude in about a month or so. We look forward to partnering with the commissioner and her team to continue to further the steps outlined therein. As many are aware, the April revenue, by virtue of the April revenue, the administration is anticipating the fair share surtax revenue to come in above the consensus benchmark. We're just beyond a year of the surtax program, and the Administration and Finance Secretariat is therefore engaging with the legislature to confirm available resources and establish mechanisms to guide the use of those funds. So stay tuned for more there, but that is good news ultimately. Also on the agenda today is an update on C3. The governor and I remain committed deeply to this vital program that helps manage the cost of care for families and facilitates increased compensation for early educators. I want to again commend Commissioner Kershaw and her team for developing a plan that will provide more clarity for providers and families as we enter this new fiscal year. We know how important it is to providers to be able to build their budgets, and we look forward to sharing more about that piece when we get to it in the agenda. Finally, am I moving along quick enough? Okay.
You're still in your allotted time here on the agenda.
Okay, very good. Okay, very good. Per the governor's executive order calling on the whole of government to collaborate on solutions toward core challenges in early education, accessibility, affordability, and workforce, we have some good news to share. First, thanks to the partnership with Secretary Jones of the Labor and Workforce Development Secretariat, the Commonwealth Corporation, and the many good folks right here from early education, the philanthropy community. We're fortunate to now have a team from the Boston Consulting Group and Neighborhood Villages to help drive the work of the task force forward. Together, this team has many decades of experience devoted to early education and care in Massachusetts and in advising other states about how to strengthen their policies. The team is off to an excellent start getting oriented to the work, and we look forward to their collaboration going forward. Also, I'm pleased to share that the task force stakeholder engagement sessions are coming soon, in fact. We will be hosting a series of both in-person and virtual sessions in late July and early August. Whether you're here in this room or listening at work or home or find out about it later, we want to hear from all of you. I'm convinced that the best policy solutions often come from the people who are in the work every day. We need your voice at the table. Stay tuned to the task force website at mass.gov, where we will be posting more details on these upcoming sessions. And that is all.
Excellent, thank you,
Chair.
Mr. Secretary. And just before I hand it over to the Commissioner, I want to extend our congratulations on your well-deserved recognition as well, and also acknowledge that in addition to the board members in the room, Board Member Cheryl Travers is joining us virtually and remotely. And I'll hand it over to the Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Secretary, I want to also extend my gratitude to our members, Jamela, Nikki, and Paul, who have agreed to continue to serve, and Paul as our chair. We're so grateful for your leadership and partnership and willingness to give your time and energy to be members of the board. So thank you so much. And just a small correction on that award. It was actually an award to all 6 New England states who've been working for more than 7 years together on cliff effect issues. So it went to the whole and the award was actually geared towards a single state, but over the last 7 years, all New England states have come together to create policies and programs and regulations and legislation that could address cliff effects. And it was a very meaningful and powerful partnership to be part of. So I was honored to represent Massachusetts, but it is a number of folks across the Department of Transitional Assistance and the Executive Office of Labor and Workforce Development, as well as our housing agencies, to really work across the whole New England region. So happy to represent Massachusetts there, but very much a shared award, and one we look forward to continuing to work on as cliff effects we are hearing and are serving as a member of the Poverty Commission, Legislative Poverty Commission. Cliff effects are still really impacting people's choices about employment, childcare, and housing. So something we need to be taking very seriously. And so take that award as down payment on the future work. And I will apologize too, without a May meeting, I have a number of updates to share. So thank you for yielding your extra time to us. So as the chair mentioned, we did take May off, mostly to focus on procurement. Many of you are aware that our procuring of contracts for income eligible and priority populations has not been done in 15 years. And so I want to start by just acknowledging the work the team did in a very complicated set of circumstances to get those requests for proposals out, and to all the providers who also did a lot of work to submit bids. We received 180 submissions, about 100 for income eligible and about 80 for our priority populations. And the intensive scoring process is underway. We have 85 volunteers from EEC and across other state agencies helping to score those proposals, and we are looking forward to new contracts starting in the fall. So I want to thank everyone we have an incredible team here who's been working on that. I also wanted to update the board that after nearly a year of discussion, which began in May of 2023, we now have a contract with 509 SEIU, which represents our family child care providers. We were very happy to sign that MOU last week. And I wanted to share that with you. It's actually effective last July 1st, and it's a 3-year contract. But the importance of that contract being negotiated and signed is that we are now able to move forward with the rate increases for our family child care providers, which in addition to the board's actions, were also subject to negotiation with 509. So our family child care providers will now be receiving their rate increase. The center-based providers received theirs in February and March, and they will be retroactive to last July 1st and should all be implemented by the end of this fiscal year. So we're really thrilled to have reached that agreement with 509 and to be able to move forward. I also wanted to update the board. For the last several years, the agency has approved a one-time closure between the Christmas and New Year's holidays for providers. This was really in recognition of really stressful and complicated labor shortages in our programs and the recognition of the hard work that the early education and care staff are doing in our programs, the importance of giving them a break during the holiday season. It's been a really important recruitment and retention tool and a way for us to recognize the needed rest that our staff working in the field need. And as a result, we've decided to make it permanent, but in a much more flexible way. So right now, programs receive 12 official holidays, 5 professional development days, and 5 approved closure days. We're going to be increasing the approved closure days by another 5. So there'll be 10 approved closure days for programs that are serving kids with child care financial assistance, which means they'll continue to get paid while they allow their staff to not work on those days. This will allow programs to have the flexibility if they choose to close between the holiday week, that is up to them. If they choose to close for other days, maybe before school starts or other times during the year that makes the most sense for them and their families and their staff. This is a really important part of recognizing the professionalization of the field and the need for our staff to have time off to rejuvenate. So we hope to get policy guidance out to the field. I know programs are anxiously awaiting making holiday scheduling plans, so we hope this information will be helpful in them being able to move forward on their schedules. At the last meeting, we had a nice update on all of our workforce initiatives, and I wanted to make sure everyone was aware that the Early Educator Scholarship is now open. We've held a number of information sessions on the Early Educator Scholarship Program. I think we had more than 500 scholarships given out last year, which was an increase over the year before. We hope to increase that again this year. And partly because of the actions that the agency in collaboration with the Board of Higher Education has taken to expand eligibility to include our residential program staff. We've also expanded the number of majors that are allowable in recognition of the sort of broad range, especially for our school age and out of school time providers, of majors that are relevant for that field. We've also simplified the application and verification process, so we look forward to supporting more educators on their path in higher education. As the board may be aware, we also announced additional expansion grants for the Commonwealth Preschool Partnership Initiative, so an additional $1.7 million as we continue to expand the reach of the program. This will add about 259 pre-K seats for children in gateway cities and also in some rural communities as well. We also have granted 2 new planning grants to Chicopee and the Taunton Public Schools to work in partnership with the community providers to build a plan for making early childhood education and particularly preschool more affordable and accessible in their communities. So we continue to be grateful for the support of CPPI and the partnerships in the communities that are expanding access. As the board knows, we were recently approved from the Federal Office of Child Care to use an alternative methodology to set our financial rates using a cost-informed approach. So saying goodbye to the exclusively using the market rate as a way to set our rates of reimbursement. So we are happy to report that we recently awarded a contract to AIR to support us in updating and refining our cost model. So to continue that work and deepen our understanding of the true cost of care and how we can inform our rates setting forward. So this summer, the AIR team will be engaging stakeholders and collecting feedback. So we look forward to engaging with members of the community as we continue to refine and build that cost model. And we will have a chance at the board's retreat this summer to dig a little bit into that as well. Related, we have been busy building our research agenda and capacity. Started with the hiring of our new research and first ever research director, Ashley White. And we recently welcomed a new research assistant, Carolyn Connolly, who's here today with us too. And also building our data and analytics team, Ellen Song, who is our new analytics analyst. So welcome, data analyst. We're also building our capacity through some incredible partnerships with our local universities. So we have a new partnership with Boston University's Wheelock Education Policy Center, which we're bringing a new fellow to work with us, primarily focused on workforce development. So a whole person dedicated through a partnership with BU and Wheelock. We also have a partnership with Harvard's Partnering in Education Research Fellowship actually in collaboration with Noni Lazo, our former board chair. So grateful for that partnership, where we'll have also a dedicated research fellow working with us focused on childcare financial assistance and understanding the impact of some of the changes we've made on access and affordability for families. And finally, through Harvard's Strategic Data Project Fellowship, actually funded through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we have a 3-year fellow who will be dedicated to the agency's work around research. And as we build our research agenda to tackle some of the big questions facing the field and understanding both our internal team, who is growing in data and analytics, as well as these research fellows will help us build that research agenda, ask those questions, and answer some of them as we continue to think about our strategic interventions in supporting the field. We will have a chance to talk about our research agenda also at the retreat. And on today's agenda, we will be asking you to vote on the establishing of a trust that will allow us to accept the funds from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to be able to fund the fellowship through strategic partnership with Harvard. So we look forward to your support on that, and introducing you to the fellows as they become integrated into our team. My last introduction, I want to make sure that you've had a chance to meet Aisha Rodriguez, who's here today. She is our first ever family engagement manager at the agency. She's funded through the preschool development grant, so that federal funding is about building systems, and a key piece of that is elevating the voice and the experience of families at the agency. And Aisha will be doing that work for us, starting with the creation of a family advisory committee. And I want to thank board member Nikki Ruiz for meeting with the family engagement team and sharing your perspectives on the best way for us to move forward on that work. As I promised, that was a long update, but thank you very much for the opportunity to share all the work happening at the agency.
As I sit here and listen to both comments, it just makes me think about the evolution of this work over the last couple of years in particular, and how we don't own all this work. It takes a community to do this work, and it takes other government agencies to do this work. It takes our higher ed partners to do this work. And I see the growing kind of data and analytics and reporting and research team that has been built, and that's going to be critical to really making sure that we're making fact-based decisions kind of moving forward, and recognize under your leadership, Commissioner, that this is a new muscle that's being developed here as well, and just really exciting about the team that's been built and the commitment to leveraging not just the internal talent, but our local community partners and higher education partners as well. So it's all good stuff. With that, we are going to move to the public comment portion of the meeting. I don't believe there's anyone here in the room for public comment. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Seeing none, I do want to acknowledge that the board has received public comment by email and has been distributed to the board prior to the start of the meeting. We also have in front of us the minutes from the April meeting in Holyoke. Are there any additions, corrections, or edits to the minutes? Hearing none, I'd make the motion to approve the minutes of the April 10th, 2024 board meeting. Can I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? George, great. Thank you, and the minutes have passed. In addition to the minutes, we have in our package, as we know, June would be the end of the fiscal year, and as we look forward to the next fiscal year, wanted to propose our meeting agenda for the year, which follows the same kind of cadence and rhythm that we have established this year. So if folks have had an opportunity to review those, I would just ask if there are any questions or comments about that before we make a motion to approve as presented. Any questions? All right, I'll make a motion that the Board of Early Education and Care, in accordance with General Law, Chapter 15D.
This is 2024. The next.
Should be 2025.
2025, yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So with that
With
edit.
that friendly amendment.
With that friendly amendment of moving the dates to 2025 as required by the schedule, I would make a motion that the Board of Early Education and Care, in accordance with General Law, Chapter 15D, Section 3B, shall meet in accordance with the schedule set forth above, and that all meetings will begin at 1 p.m. and be held at 50 Milk Street, Boston, Mass., unless otherwise announced and duly posted. Can I have a second?
Second.
Second, great. Jamela. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Great. And then we want to move on to the Gates vote as well.
Good news is we can repurpose slides. The bad news is sometimes when you repurpose slides, you might not see them.
These fiscal years are,
Yeah.
you know. they,
Fiscal calendar, right?
We knew what you meant.
Yeah. So as the commissioner mentioned, one of the priorities for the board in order to accept the Gates funding for the 3-year fellowship through the Harvard Strategic Data Partnership Program would be to establish a trust to accept the funds and then administer those funds. So in the packet sent to you, there's information on that. Before I move to questions or answers, do you want to add anything to, I know you covered that in your update. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but do you want to open up for any questions, comments on that before we make a motion to approve the establishment of the trust?
Obviously, the establishment of the trust allows us to seek funding. Does that mean that we will do more seeking of funding in the future from philanthropy?
We don't, so this trust is really for the purposes of accepting the
Yes.
funds that have been set aside, and we haven't contemplated seeking additional funding, but that could be something we could do if there's additional needs that the data and research team or the board identifies.
And I think in your comments, Mr. Secretary, there is some philanthropy engaged with the hiring of the consultant for, so I think, again, the partnerships that are expanding in order to facilitate this work has been impressive. So with that, I would make a motion that the Board of Early Education and Care hereby authorizes the Commissioner pursuant to General Law, Chapter 15D, Section 4, to apply for and accept grant funding and establish an expendable trust for the purpose of receiving the funds to support the cost of data analysis and implementation for the department. Can I get a second?
Second.
Nikki, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. And it passes. Great.
Excellent.
And then next, do you want to take
Oh, what?
change the order?
Why don't we do the budget update, and then I think we'll move to the state plan. We have a board member who
Great.
needs to leave early, and I want to make sure we have the opportunity to have them vote on the state plan action. So we'll switch the order for the
Great.
state plan and the update on the residential regulations.
Great. So I'll turn it to you for the next item.
Thank you. So just a reminder for the board members that the budget process is really ongoing all year, and it sort of depends on who's focusing on it. So we are into the blue on the left-hand side of this chart. So most of you are aware that the governor issues her budget, proposes her budget in January, and then the House and Senate work on their budgets in the spring, and they have each finalized those. A conference committee has now been established through the legislature who will take up the differences between the House and the Senate version of the budgets, reach consensus on that, and then send a joint proposal to the governor for her consideration. And so we are in that conference committee process right now. So we don't have final budget numbers or information to share, but we did want to give an update for folks on where we are in the budget process and what each of the versions are. And I will start by saying each one of the budget proposals is fantastic for the department. We are at $1.55 billion in each of the proposals. We are incredibly grateful for the support of the governor for early education and childcare, as well as the House and Senate, who have both shown up to really make significant new investments across some of the agency and the board's key priorities. So I'm going to walk through some of the details on the differences among the versions so that you're aware of those as we're in this sort of the conference committee process. But significant investments across child care, financial assistance, and family access and engagement, Commonwealth Cares for Children at $475 in each version of the budget, so following the commitment from the governor. And then other workforce and program supports and priorities for the agency have all been funded as well. This budget is a little bit complicated because we are so fortunate to have funding from the Fair Share Amendment, which comes into different and separate line items. There also is an ongoing early education and care trust that funds some things. So on slide 49 in the appendix is kind of our full line items, but we've taken a slightly different approach to presenting the information to you today so that you can see what it looks like kind of by priority and program. So I'm going to highlight in each of the three key priority areas You can see in this chart sort of the difference between the three versions across the different accounts. And I'm going to do that in each of the three areas. And then we'll talk a little bit about the differences between the House and Senate versions so you know what they're discussing in conference committee. For access management, which is our child care resource and referral agencies, each of the proposals includes $20 million. And then the next two line items, the DCF and DTA related and the income eligible child care, are child care financial assistance. That's where we fund our vouchers and contracts from. And you can see variations, and I'll highlight this a little bit in terms of the differences and how the budgets funded it. So the House funded a specific line item for waitlist remediation, so that would be to pull families off the waitlist. But both the governor's budget and the Senate budget included the governor's $75 million and the Senate $80 million to increase access for families to receive child care financial assistance. All three budgets, and they funded a little bit differently, so it's confusing, but all three budgets annualize fully the $65 million in rate increases that we passed this year by the board and are now being implemented, in addition to including another $20 million. Each of the three proposals includes another $20 million for rate increases in the coming fiscal year. So we look forward to having those discussions with the board as well. Some variations, we have a supplemental state program for Head Start, and each of the versions has slightly different funding levels for Head Start. Our coordinated family and community engagement grants, our Parent Child Plus, and Reach Out and Read are what we consider our sort of family access and child care financial assistance line items. Spending a couple minutes on Commonwealth Cares for Children, C3. So again, the biggest and most important headline is that all three versions of the budget include $475 million and a commitment to continuing this program at that funding level into the next fiscal year, which is the greatest news. Each of them take a slightly different approach to where they're funding the proposal from, or where they're funding the 475 from, whether it's iLottery or Fair Share, and some from the trust, as I mentioned. And the House and Senate versions also have language that differs from each other and differs from the governor's budget. So that will also be part of the conversation at the conference committee. And what we're going to be presenting following the budget presentation is sort of the agency's strategy and proposal for how to move forward, both in the beginning part and then through FY25 around Commonwealth Cares for Children. As you all know, we've been working all year sort of at this inflection point, and as we make this transition from what was a COVID era stabilization program into ongoing operational supports, we have been working hard to understand the impact of the program and the best way to organize it to be sustainable going forward into FY25 and beyond. The investments that both the governor, the House, and the Senate have proposed set us apart from every other state, where they have seen a sunsetting of these federal funds. Some states have maintained a portion of these funds, but I think we are the sole state who has actually maintained the program at the full funding level that we previously had from federal sources. And it is a very different picture here than it is in other states. So although there's variations in the language, and we'll be discussing that today and through the conference committee, I think overall we're in a much better position than many other states who have looked at a pretty significant funding cliff for the early education and care sector. Finally, in other workforce and program supports, you can see this is where we fund our quality improvement line. That's actually a lot of our licensing staff who oversee and monitor programs. There are some new workforce-related earmarks I'll talk about in a second that were included in the House budget, and then variations in proposals around the CPPI program and the expansion of that program that I'll talk about in a minute as well. Support across all three budgets at $5 million for our early childhood mental health consultation grant, which we're very happy about. And then Career Pathways, which is our partnership with the 15 community colleges and Urban College, is not funded as a separate line item through the Senate's budget at EEC, but is in the governor's proposal and in the House budget. So let me quickly just run through some of the differences in the House and the Senate proposals that will be part of the conference committee. So There are significant differences, again, amazing investments in the agency and recognition of the hard work of the field, but differences that will be part of the discussion. So $475 million will not across C3. Again, $65 million in rate increases being fully annualized in both the House and Senate, plus another $20 million for a rate increase in this year, which will allow us to continue the reform efforts that we started this year in terms of implementing rate increases that are cost-informed. Alternative methodology will help us do that as well. In the House version of the budget, they included about $28 million for child care financial assistance. So that's for new families to receive child care financial assistance, either through vouchers or contracts, including an $8 million earmark for staff working in early education. The Senate proposal mirrored much more the governor's proposal, which was to increase overall the amount of funding that's available for our caseload accounts at $80 million, which would allow us to increase the number of families served and take more additional families off of the waiting list. The House and the Senate took slightly different approaches to funding for our Head Start State Supplemental Grant Program. The Senate included the $15 million expansion for CPPI, which was included in the governor's budget, but that did not appear in the House budget. The House budget did include $10 million for our career pathways. We don't see that line item specifically at EEC, although the Senate did do many investments in free community college, so it may be represented elsewhere in the budget, still clarifying that. And then the House included two new earmarks within our administrative line item that which would provide some workforce support for the early education and care staff working in the field. One is a $10 million for a new higher education scholarship program, and the other is $10 million for a new loan forgiveness program. The Senate included $2.5 million for an employer-sponsored pilot, so a partnership with employers and supporting their employees with childcare. And they also specifically included $6 million for our summer step-up program, which was a COVID-era early learning program in the summer that was intended to support learning loss and has been a big success and of great value to families and also to programs in the community. So you can see that there'll be a lot of discussion at the conference committee on the different versions of the budget, and also good news in all the versions for the agency as well. I'm going to pause there.
Any questions on the budget? Just I would just, where you started, just say, gratitude to not only the governor's office and your advocacy, Mr. Secretary, but colleagues in the House and Senate for the continued investment in this in really important work. And I think, the theme for me is partnership, and I think the task force members could probably validate this investment is about ensuring that children and families have access to quality education and care, that the workforce has what they need to be successful, but also underlies how important this is to the entire economy. And so appreciate the continued commitment from all partners in ensuring that we're talking about this and reconciling some of the language that is involved with it, but most importantly, the financial commitment to do this work. And so thank you for the presentation.
I have a quick question.
Please.
Where is the department in all this? Like, where are we with regards to our preference, or how does this align with our strategic goals and priorities? There's some differences in both budgets, so I just want to see.
Sure. We work very closely with the governor's office on her budget. So the Gateway to Pre-K agenda and the governor's proposal reflects the agency's priorities as well as the board's strategic priorities. So in general, when we're communicating with the conference committee, what we hope to be able to achieve is what the governor proposed in her budget. So as we talk to the conference committee about either specific funding levels for various programs or language that's included or not included, we're talking about trying to really promote what we put forward as an administration in the governor's budget, and I'm happy to send that back around if it would be helpful to. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. All right, with that, we're gonna just take a minute to reorient.
So I think,
Do you want-
I think I'm gonna suggest that we stick with C3 because it is very much budget
Okay.
related, and then let's come and do the state plan. So,
Great.
I'm gonna invite Jocelyn Bowen and Amy Checkaway to come up so that we can talk a little bit about the Commonwealth Cares for Children program. So, as I mentioned, it is very budget related because, while each version of the budget, the governor, the Senate, and the House includes $475 million. There are differences in the language and the directionality for the agency. And as you know, we've been presenting C3 data to the board over the last 2 years, talking about the impact of the program, understanding as we move to a state-funded program and think about sustaining this program in the longer term. We've been working with our stakeholders in the field. We had a number of sessions with stakeholders following the late in the year budget reductions that the agency was compelled to make. And so what we wanted to do today is present to you sort of the agency's strategy and proposal for C3 in FY25 and really beyond. So we have a set of principles and some analysis about what we're proposing. So I'm going to turn it over to Jocelyn and Amy to walk you through where we are on that.
Thank you, Commissioner, Board. Happy to be back talking about C3. I think I'm going to go through the first few slides fairly quickly. You've seen them before, but they do ground the conversation. As a reminder, C3 was begun during the pandemic as an effort to support programs managing their operational expenses at a time of reduced revenue as a result of both program closure, enforced closure, and reduced enrollment. Enrollment has since come back, but what we have learned over the years is the costs of addressing the workforce challenges that are now facing the field have been sustained and supported through C3. So compensation has increased in efforts to recruit and retain staff, and C3 has allowed programs to mitigate the tuition and fee increases that might potentially be necessary to manage those costs. And we continue to have a commitment to paying close attention to C3, how it's functioning in the field, how the field is using it, to ensure that it is positioned to sustain and build the quality of services and education that families and young children have access to in Massachusetts. Thank you. I'll click. You
Just point it at me and
It'll be my clicker. We've been keeping track of what we've been learning from the field over time, both through surveys and through the data that we've gotten through the application process. And we have seen the ways in which C3 has supported program stability. We've seen license capacity rebound and then now actually exceed pre-pandemic levels. But we also hear from programs that C3 has been a really important component of sustaining operations. We've also seen that workforce compensation has grown during the period that C3 hasn't been available. While at the same time, programs do report that they use C3 to avoid ongoing and continuous increases in tuition or very large increases in tuition. So there are efforts to maintain affordability, while also recognizing that every program is balancing their budget the best that they can to meet these competing demands. But C3 is a really important component in that. Yeah. So from this work, we've come up with a set of goals for FY25. We talked about some of these when we were thinking about where we were going with May and June, but we recognize again that C3 really is a critical funding mechanism for the field, and this is something that it's really important for us to sustain. And it has ongoing purpose. As times change, C3 adjusts and is flexible enough to support the adjustments that programs have to make over time. And this means universality of access to C3 is also an important principle and something that we are focused on. And yes, I did switch the slides, sorry.
Oh.
Just two. And then we are also focused on wanting to provide more equitable distributions that are aligned with the expected costs associated with the quality of services that we would like to see. And this is where we really have the opportunity to leverage the strong cost work that's been done over the last few years and think about how we can readjust the formula to be more equitable in providing funding to programs associated with the costs that we would expect based on the program type. And we'll talk a little further about some of those details in a minute. We also do want to direct additional funding to programs that are effectively serving low and moderate income families, and this includes incentivizing participation and access to children receiving child care financial assistance. And finally, we've really heard the importance of predictability in funding, and particularly after the last few months, that it's important both for the agency, but for programs and their budgeting as well, to know what funding they will get over the course of the year and not have that change. So we have some thoughts about how to sustain that, while at the same time recognizing that flexibility in fund use is important, that programs continue to have the ability to direct the funds in the ways and towards the purposes that we're encouraging as an agency, but also have the flexibility to use the funds in the ways that are most meaningful to any individual program. Next slide. So thinking about FY25, we're recognizing we really need a two-stage approach. The budget is under discussion. As the commissioner described, there are a couple of, the House has a version, the Senate has a version. We are waiting on the conference committee that has started, and they will do their work and come out with a final budget. But there are some requirements around C3 that are different across those two budgets, and we need to make sure that when we take a look and thinking about revising the formula and making some of the changes that we want to make, that it's responsive to the budget and is aligned with the budget as it finally comes out. And to get there, we need to know both what the budget is, then need to cost out the specifics of the formula that we'll be talking about, and make the administrative changes to launch it. So looking at all of these pieces that have to be in play to move to a new formula, what we'd like to do is have an interim plan through the summer, so that in the fall, ideally in October or November, we could launch a new formula. To do that we also want to keep grant funding flowing to programs. We don't want to say we're going to stop and wait until we know what the budget is or what our final decisions are. So we would like to keep money flowing and continue to use the May and June tiered structure that we've had in place. This is compliant with all the different versions of the budget language that we've seen so far, so we wouldn't be putting ourselves in the position of putting out funding in a way that isn't aligned with the final budget once it does come out. And it allows us to keep money moving, while we are also able to do the final work on the details of a new formula, bring that back out for discussion and feedback before launching something in the fall. The other thing that we do want to do in the summer, we did hold access to C3 to all new programs through May and June as a mechanism to sort of control the expenditures. But at the same time, we do recognize that C3 has been an important mechanism for expanding field-wide capacity, and we do want to continue to support new programs. So we've been thinking about a quarterly approach to allowing new programs in. So rather than coming in when a program opens up, we would have certain sort of points in the year every quarter where we would allow programs who are new to the field during that quarter to come in and start receiving C3. And we would like to start that in July for the programs that did not have access in May and June. And we're also in the process, and the rest of this presentation will focus in on what we're thinking about, what a new formula could look like, but also, again, want to wait to put in place a new formula until we're at a point where we're like, yes, this is final, and we're not going to keep changing things, because the need for consistency is really important. So we're going to share our principles, and we're at sort of the high design level. We don't have numbers in there. We don't have specifics about exactly what the adjustments will look like. That has to follow the budget and follow the final costing. But we do want to share the principles, and then obviously would come back with more final information once we know where we're going.
I know we're going to jump in. I just want to name and show appreciation for the complexity of which you're working in right now. Like, no, it's really important. Like, this program is a success, right? And so with that, and it's still fairly new, and it's just kind of entering a different phase,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to reconcile the desire to bring some predictability to providers while budget language and it is a very complex kind of threading of a needle you're trying to do that even just 2 slides in I can feel. And so just want to acknowledge the hard work that I think you guys have put into this as we go deeper into what the proposed formula and tiered approach will look like. It's complicated. Yeah, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Paul. And I should say we are going to be pretty deep into kind of the details of what our thinking has been and where we think we need to go in 25. So we'll beg the board's indulgence on that level of detail, which is both for your benefit, but also for the benefit of the broader field, who we will now be able to share this work with. And engage with them as we think about, an interim period that holds things steady and a October going forward period where we hope to create greater predictability and consistency and a new approach.
So this is the structure of the new formula that we're proposing. It looks very similar to the one that we've had. We're not, fundamentally changing everything, but there are some important changes that I just want to call out. First of all, the formula that everybody's familiar with right now, there's a base rate that's structured based on license capacity, a per slot payment, and then an adjustment based on the number of staff that a program, or number of educators that a program has currently working. Because we now have the cost models that we have, and we can actually look at our cost models and understand, given our expectations for different program types and the types of investments, particularly in staffing that we would like to see, we can identify what we should be paying programs to target the gap between expected costs and expected revenues, and restructure that per slot payment based on those different program types and our expectations for programs rather than the actual staffing. We have heard from programs that there is some concern that for those that have higher revenue, it's easier to have more staff, and that ends up actually advantaging some programs where really what we want is everyone to be on a level playing field based on the nature of the program and the expected costs. And we'll go into more detail on all of these, as the commissioner promised.
Painful detail.
There is as much detail as you want. And then this would be sort of a per slot payment based on license capacity. The only other change that also does require is the staffing adjustment serves to focus the current grant on the staffed capacity. Some programs do have license capacity based on the space, and there are classrooms that are not currently open, which is adjusted for with the staffing adjustment. Without the staffing adjustment, what we also factor in is program enrollment. And again, we'll take an approach, and we've heard from the field as we've been talking about this, that it's really important to recognize that we're not going to penalize the normal adjustment that happens across enrollment within a window. So, sort of Head Start takes the approach of saying, if you're above 85% of your enrollment, you're considered fully enrolled, and then, you take a look at if you go below that. We would consider similar buffers in this approach. We've also heard from family child care providers that one child really makes a big difference in a percentage, and there's a lot of fluctuation that they're addressing, so we probably wouldn't have the same benchmarks for center-based and for family child care providers, but we would think very carefully about what the appropriate amount is. But if you go below a benchmark, then the payment would be prorated based on the actual enrollment reported within the program. And then we also have an equity adjustment. This is integrating the old equity adjustment, which was based on the amount of child care financial assistance, a number of children with child care financial assistance, a program enrolled, as well as where a program was located. And we also have the tiered structure that we've used in May and June that uses similar inputs. So what we're doing is we're integrating those together and using a tiered structure, but using it differently than we have in May and June to really support equity adjustments to invest further funding in programs that are meeting certain criteria. And we'll talk again about those details in a minute. Any questions just on the overall structure?
So I have a couple of comments. I know this is still a lot more to discuss and a lot of specifics that we still need to determine, and it's also pending where we land on the budget, as the commissioner mentioned. But I know it's hard to commit right now to a minimum or a commitment of allocation per tier. Again, and this formula will land us where it lands us. But I think I don't want to let complexity get in the way of what we're trying to do here and who we're trying to support here. I think this fund came from civilization for businesses, but it's, like you said, it's progressing in terms of civilization for children, and, that's the center focus here. And obviously those most vulnerable children is included in here and has been growing with the formula, so obviously that's great. But I think I'm just gonna say that the benefit of committing to a minimum amount of funding per tier, it's so that we don't let things that children don't control or specific populations don't control get in the way of how much money are those programs going to receive. For example, there's a lot of variables here. When is the license capacity? We can, in the first part of the formula, percentage enrolled, it has to be super important of what month we pick, because September, it's impossible for programs to maintain full enrollment, and some of them go under 85. Infant toddler capacity could really depend on whether the town or the city has a space for it, or many different, I'm speaking personally in Lawrence, for example. Number of new programs quarterly are going to change and vary those amounts. So I just want to throw a word of just caution. And again, I know we're not landing in quantities yet, but I would love to see some sort of commitment so that we don't change without, change purpose or goal without wanting to.
I mean, I think it's not addressing everything you're saying, but I do think one thing that is important for us to think about, and we are thinking about how to do this over the next few months, is to make sure we're getting the input from the field to set all of these things in a way that really makes sense. Like you were saying about enrollment, if it's based on a particular month, picking the month matters. Maybe it shouldn't be based on a particular month. Maybe it should be like what we're doing with subsidy right now, and there's a look-back period, and it's sort of the highest of what you have over a period of time. Those are some details that I think we can work with feedback on identifying properly. And the other piece that we are paying very close attention to is we're not creating this agnostic of what has been. So we're looking and paying attention to, as we make changes, we're able to run the numbers to understand, sort of how does this adjust things for people who have been at different tiers and in different places, depending on how the formula plays out. And in particular in the equity adjustment, we really do want it to either replicate or exceed what we have had in the past for an equity adjustment, not undermine. So.
Why don't we get to the program tiers, and I think we can see if there's additional questions that Maria has too. And I think, part of our conversations with the House and Senate, I think there is a tension that goes to the complexity here of wanting to nail down exactly what this program is and what the new formula is and where it's going and what can we see, and recognizing that we're in a continuous learning moment for this program as it transitions, and our field is in transition too. So I think a lot of our conversations with the House and Senate, and even what we're proposing here, are directionality for FY25. We're not proposing like, here's the permanent, this program has enabled us to have a relationship with nearly all providers across the Commonwealth and collect data and have insight and understand the impact of this funding and programs in a way that I don't think the agency's ever had before. So we want to stay in a mode of continuous learning while making adjustments and improvements and enhancements that reflect what we've learned from the field so far and those principles that we had. We want to put more into the programs that are serving our low-income families while maintaining a level of universality, because all working families are struggling to pay for early education and care, and the cost model is difficult for nearly every program. So we're sort of trying to balance what we've learned, directing more resources while maintaining some level of universality, creating predictability and some consistency while maintaining the ability to make changes into the future. So there is a very
And knowing
there's a
others may
narrow
have-
needlehead that we're trying to thread through here. So why don't we hit the tiers, the slide on the tiers, and then
I'll just
we
say-
can come back to the question too. So I think everyone else is caught up on
Oh,
your,
yeah.
you,
No,
you
the
have a
reason
depth
I
of-
asked the question
yeah.
or even say the comment in terms of that is just because the department has done so much in terms of eligibility, accessibility, specific supports for the vulnerable families in the state, that there is no way of making a change without people being like, oh, please don't take this away because it's really working. So, I just want to make sure that we're super conscious of that.
I hear you. All So this just outlines the different program types that we've been looking at. And again, I will say I'm just so excited to be able to look at, so I don't remember if you remember in the cost model, I'm going to be geeky just for a minute, but there were like 3 different models with like current salaries, sort of goals for salaries, and then like staffing and salaries. What we finally were able to do is take that sort of like cost of quality model and say, like, what is the expected staffing that we would want to see in a high quality program? What are the compensation targets that we've put in place in that cost model? And look at the costs in comparison to revenues and trying to think about how do we target this formula around what it takes to fill that, to start filling that gap. So we've identified, sorry, I'm now counting 7 different program types. Actually, no, it's 14, isn't it? On the center-based side, full-time and part-time programs are very different in terms of their costs. And again, a lot of this is still driven by staffing, but we would have 2 different per slot rates for full-time and part-time programs. And then looking at the ages programs serve, again, that is the biggest driver of differentiation in cost. Again, because of the staffing needed to serve infants and toddlers is very different than what's needed for a school-age program. So we would define groups of program based on the youngest ages that they serve.
I think if we just stay at the higher level and talk about like what's different from the way we do it now. So we're sort of treating everyone like a preschool program and then making some staffing adjustments. And the new way we're talking about approaching it is recognizing the age groups, the kids that are being served, which reflects staffing. So, right, in an infant room where you have a ratio of 1 to 3, that's going to be very different than sort of the way we've done it before. And also recognizing the difference between family child care and center-based, which we didn't in the current formula either. So
I think the only other thing I would call out is the difference between how we do treat center-based and family child care here.
Yeah.
We don't assume in family child care the ages served make a fundamental difference in the cost. So it is still more about the staffing. Okay. All right, we'll go on to the tiers.
All right, so we are proposing to continue to move forward with different tiers or levels of funding, which we began to do in May, and make a few key adjustments in fiscal year 25 based on all the input we have heard from the field and also some additional analysis and as informed by the cost models. So as you can see here, we are proposing that Tier 1 would include programs who are serving 25% or more children participating in the Child Care Financial Assistance System and also or Head Start programs, really recognizing that we do want to both continue to incentivize participation in the state child care financial assistance system and also target funds to programs serving the most vulnerable families. We have, as Jocelyn mentioned, we are also considering integrating the equity adjustment into the tiered structure, so I just wanted to mention them so that in tiers 1 and 2, programs will be adjusted up in recognition again of the families that they are serving. So you can see here that Tier 2 would include both families serving a smaller percentage of children who are participating in the Child Care Financial Assistance System, but we have also heard loud and clear from the field and gotten a lot of input, and we see in our data that many programs are really making efforts to support low and moderate income families using their own financially using some of their own resources or local resources, supporting both families and often their educators as well. So we wanted to recognize these programs as well that are really contributing a meaningful amount of financial assistance, again, either for their educators or needs-based financial assistance to their families.
I'm sorry, Amy, let me just jump in there too, because I think it picks up on something Maria was referencing too, which is that, you all have heard we have a waiting list for child care financial assistance, and we are at our appropriation right now. So to only rely on those families that are able to get through and receive our child care financial assistance, which we of course hope is many more families, doesn't actually reflect the full number of families who are out there receiving child care financial assistance. I think if the Ys were here, they would talk about there's a lot of cross-subsidy between the recreation programs and their child care programs. So they are many programs out there, small programs, big programs, are providing formalized child care financial assistance or sliding fee scales to low and moderate income families. And we've heard from them, as Amy said, that it would be important to recognize that as we consider sort of where they fall in the tiers. And so we haven't nailed exactly what that would look like, but it would need to be a formally recognized program that was published and documented and verifiable by us. But I think it expands the reach and recognition that there's a lot of programs out there that are doing a lot to support affordability, even when their families are eligible for our financial assistance, but may not be able to get through. So this would be a new way of sort of recognizing the work that programs are doing.
Yes, and relatedly, we would like to continue to be able to direct some additional funding to programs who are located in communities which have fewer resources for children, and perhaps those programs are not participating in the child care financial assistance system currently, and also that they, I think we know especially that for many family child care providers who would fall into this category, that many of those providers are really trying to keep costs low for their families. And so again, they may be supporting low and moderate income families in other ways. We are hoping if we can are able to move in this direction that we will use a new place-based metric. So as I think many of you know, we began C3 by using a place-based metric, which is really focused on sort of disaster response and sort of public health focus, the Social Vulnerability Index, which is developed by the CDC. And we have identified another metric, which is called the Child Opportunity Index, which is a similar sort of composite metric that includes a lot of different indicators. But those indicators are really much more focused on sort of resources locally for families and for children. And so this is a widely used measure. So it was actually developed by researchers at Brandeis University and Ohio State University. And we think that it will better target resources, again, towards families and kids and sort of the educational opportunities resources locally. So would hope to be able to move forward with that. Happy to talk more about that if there are questions as well. And then we do recognize, again, in response, Maria, to your earlier comments, again, want to both balance directing funds to programs who are serving our most vulnerable and lower income families, but also hoping for some flexibility, recognizing that programs may shift tiers over time. Again, we're trying to really incentivize participation in child care financial assistance system, providing financial supports for lower and moderate income families. And so I think there's a balance between, again, making sure we're directing sufficient funds to the programs that we want to prioritize and that we know really are most in need of resources, and also wanting to recognize that programs may shift over time in terms of the tier that they would fall into.
This
I'm
is
not
the
gonna go
last
through all
one,
of
but
this.
it's very detailed, I know.
But we've covered most of it
yes,
already.
Yes, we have. So it's
not
really a
much new
summary
information. It's a summary
of what's gone
slide.
before. Yeah.
Yeah, so I won't go through all of this. I think we've touched on almost all of it. But this really summarizes the adjustments that we are proposing for fiscal year 25. The first few are formula adjustments, I think that we've covered and Jocelyn covered earlier. And then at the bottom are some of the administrative changes that we are hoping to make to, again, both ensure consistency and also continue to allow new programs into C3 over time. And so, again, striking a balance between understanding that, again, some programs will shift, but wanting to move forward with more consistency and really sort of setting funding levels. Again, perhaps using a point in time in the fall to establish some fixed payments for programs for a while that could be adjusted, for example, annually, as an example. So I think we are trying to, again, move forward carefully and thoughtfully and not, again, really at every step making sure that we are minimizing disruption to the system. And hopeful that C3 will continue to be eligible for all programs, but recognizing that programs have different levels of need, but want to support the stability of the whole system.
Can you just touch on the CEO compensation ratio for a minute?
Sure. So we currently have in place a sort of adjustment factor whereby we gather from every application the CEO compensation of the highest paid person in the organization. And that includes, for the very large organizations, stock options and all the components of the compensation. And that is compared in a ratio to the lowest paid educator at a program site. And that ratio then is used to determine are programs crossing a benchmark that we set. It's currently set at 40-1. And if you are above that benchmark, you receive none of the equity adjustments or the staffing adjustment. It is just the per slot payment. So it sort of adjusts down the overall payment that programs at that level would get. Looking at the distribution of programs that are sort of caught in that equity adjustment, and it is per site, we want to bring it down to 30-1, I think is what we're looking at right now, so that we're really more comprehensively capturing some of those discrepancies in compensation in some of the very large multi-state organizations.
Yes, thank you. So I think, and again, apologies for the level of complication, but it is, I think we're balancing the complication with addressing all the things we want to address while also trying to make it. But I think that you can see that throughout each of the things that we're trying to do, whether it's using the COI instead of the SVI, that's like more narrowly targeting into those families and communities that we really want to reach. We're going to create these tiers so that we can make sure more of the funding is directed to our lower and moderate income families and the programs who've committed to serving them. And then the formula being adjusted to do that too. So keeping everyone in the system and support for the programs that want to continue to participate, because they could select not to, and it may not be worth it for some programs at some point. But really making sure that we're tipping the scales towards those programs that are serving our lowest income, and using kind of every tool that we have to incentivize folks to participate. I think that even over the last year, we've seen a very significant increase in the number of programs that are interested in taking child care financial assistance and signing voucher agreements, in the hope that when we have more funding, that they will serve our families. So I think it's gone up from 50 to nearly 63% of licensed programs are taking child care financial assistance. And I think somewhere between the rates and the scholarships that we're providing to our early education and care staff and the C3 program, we made it better to do business with us, which was a great outcome. And we want to continue to use C3 as a tool in that direction as well. So thank you for indulging our ability to share this. I think we probably just want to take a second to talk a little bit about where what we've said is and isn't aligned potentially with the House and Senate version of the budget.
Yeah, first, no sorry on this. Like, this detail is really helpful because, number one, it shows how much thought you all are putting into this, because it is living in continuous improvement right now. And I know this slide here, like, it also doesn't take into consideration that we're weeks away from maybe getting some recommendations to come with the funding as well that may tweak some of this. And so it's, it just feels like you've positioned this to be responsive to that process too, as the conference committee goes through the budget negotiations. And again, if there's language that is tied to the funding that, brings in a different point of view or a tweak that needs to be made, like, that is, for good and bad. Like, I think we all hope for the day of predictability and consistency, but we're just in a growth phase of a program, just like any company would be or any program would be. And this mindset that you guys are bringing to this is just really helpful, and the detail is really helpful so that we can be better ambassadors for that continuous improvement work that's happening as well. And so I know the next couple of weeks in particular, you guys are probably looking at the budget process very closely. Yes, about the dollars, but even more so about the language that may come with it, because that is a very big factor in what this looks like in the next couple of months and weeks and years ahead. So just think it's important to know that I appreciate the next couple of weeks are important to this work as well. Questions on C3? Nikki?
I just want to thank you guys. This is really great work, and I think does sort of checks a lot of the boxes that we've been hoping to get. Increasing participation in child care financial assistance, giving more money to low-income communities, incentivizing people to take on other subsidies. The one thing, and you know what I'm going to say, because I say it at every single meeting, But the one thing that I continue to have a concern about is, can we use C3 to drive down the cost of tuition more broadly? And I know that we sort of have this hypothesis that if we provide C3, then hopefully tuitions go down, people don't have to increase tuitions. However, I don't think that that's what we've seen over the course of the past few years across the state. Anecdotally, I haven't done the study, but I can see anecdotally across families that I interact with that the tuition rates have in fact gone up quite a bit. In my neighborhood, which is a low-income neighborhood, there's not a place that a private pay family can have their kids for less than $20,000 a year. And so like that, there's a big swath of families who don't qualify for the subsidies who cannot afford that. Like $20,000 is way too much, obviously.
I think what you're calling out is a tension in what we are trying to accomplish here.
Yeah.
So we have a very generous but set amount of money that we're working with. We have the field as it is and the size that it is. We have the costs that are increasing on all fronts. It's not just compensation that's increasing, it's everything is increasing right now. We're in a period of inflation.
Yeah.
So all of those things have to balance out for programs' budget, and programs are going to do what they have to do to meet their costs, look at all the revenues, and then figure out what they have to charge families. So we do have a tension that we have to think about. There is the idea that we want this to be universal. We want to support the field broadly. We want to continue to support growth in the field. But it also would take a certain amount of focused, targeted money to achieve what you're saying, which is using C3 to stop the increases in a time of inflation.
Right.
That's a trade-off.
Right.
I mean, that's
and
something
C3 isn't
we
big
have
enough to
think
do
through.
that, is what you're saying.
I don't think so.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's something we're still trying to understand in this. I think because we were going from like a field and free fall to a stabilization to a growth back, like I think we are treading carefully not to disrupt the growth that's come back into the field.
Yeah.
But we understand and have had many conversations about like what is the mechanism for controlling costs,
Yeah.
and that we could potentially build into C3 that makes sure things aren't passed on to families. And I don't think we've quite landed on that mechanism, but we have heard you loud and clear, and we have heard families and the field and the data. I think for our very, very low income families who are able to get through and access childcare financial assistance, and then families who can afford, and there's these families who are really stuck in the middle, not being able to afford the cost of care, and they're making difficult choices too. So we have those families in mind too, and I think it's something we have not landed on necessarily what that mechanism is yet.
But it is a part of why we're thinking about that middle tier,
Yeah.
supporting programs that are taking steps in the direction that you're talking
Yeah.
about. So that
Yeah.
the more, and that's a part of why it feels really, really important to think about how we are directing funding
Yeah.
towards those efforts without setting such hard and strict bars that we end
Yeah.
up putting putting everybody in a place where it feels really tight and constrained.
Yeah.
We also have built into one of our research contracts some additional analysis of tuition rates over time, just so we can better understand.
Yeah.
I expect we will see costs going up, but which kinds of programs and which communities, and what the relationship of C3 is to tuition. So
That's great.
hopefully we'll
That's
have
great.
a little bit more to talk about in the fall.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I appreciate that like middle tier could do some of this. I think maybe it's just thinking about, it's not just scholarships, but, folks who are charging less than the area median, that kind of thing.
Right.
So that we're kind of like nudging people to like, hey, just try to keep it, And of course, I understand that, folks have to cover the costs and but if there's any of that like kind of nudging that we can do. It's great.
I think along with that thought, I don't think this is a problem that EEC alone can solve. I think the business sector has to be, we just came from a pandemic where we realized that childcare is linked to everything, financially, economically, economic development in every community. And I think cities and towns need to figure it out as well, along with EEC. EEC can help big time. You know, again, they know how the system works, but I think businesses, you know, different boards, and they do exist. I mean, I think the right people are at the right table right now. You're one of them, and I think it's a realization of that. So I think maybe a more conscious or more aggressive effort of bringing all those people to the table, you know, and you know, mayors of each city in terms of like what are challenges. I mean, Lawrence has a good program that has been replicated in Boston as well, and to a certain degree, and they work differently everywhere. But I think EEC cannot do that alone. It should be done, though. I agree with you. I mean, that it's impossible for families right now, but I don't think this is a problem that EEC alone can solve.
Any other comments, questions from the board?
Just thank you.
Yeah.
Great job as always.
Thank you.
Can I just ask because it's always so interesting and it goes a little to this conversation and the more in-depth research to come, but can you just remind us the next round of kind of data like that kind of comes from?
From C3.
Yeah.
So we paused on the survey this spring, just given all the
Yeah,
other
sure, makes sense,
changes
yeah.
that were happening, but hope to do a condensed version of a survey in part to inform actually the next iteration of the cost models this summer,
Great.
but have an opportunity then to ask some additional questions.
Awesome, thank you.
So if there's questions folks are interested in.
No,
we should
I just,
pass
it's
them
always
along.
interesting to look
Yes.
at, especially now
Yeah.
that it's a couple of years, just to see the trend lines and stuff.
Yeah.
It's just
And we can certainly bring
intellectually
additional
interesting.
data
Yeah,
back
yeah.
that we collect on an ongoing basis as well. Yeah.
Are you asking what their charges, that the tuition rates are for families?
Oh, you know, you can go. Yes, and actually, we've been, we have taken some steps to hopefully get even better information about that, so yes.
Thank you.
Great, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jocelyn, I think you're staying for the
Oh, am I?
state
Are we doing the state plan next? Yes,
Yeah,
I'm
so,
Congrats, Jocelyn.
yeah, great. And I'm going to invite
Sorry,
Leah
Jocelyn.
Jack and Tyrese Nicholas to come up and join. I am going to advance to, and we will come back to do an update on our regulatory revision process for our residential programs. Thanks. As we, you ready?
Yeah.
Sorry. Are we up? Yep. Sorry. So apologies for flipping the agenda around. We're hoping that, I know that George has to leave at 2:45, so we're hoping to get some of this in to get to a vote. We'll see. So members have a chance. We, I believe, updated the board in February about the Child Care and Development Fund state plan. So I'm going to turn it over to the team, but I just remind the board that a significant amount of our funding comes from the federal government. The Administration for Children and Families, the Office of Child Care administers the Child Care and Development Fund. And every 3 years, we have a large administrative responsibility to submit a state plan. And if any of you had the good fortune to read the 176 pages that we sent you in draft form, you can see that it is a very complicated template, and it's really about ensuring compliance with the requirements of the Child Care and Development Fund and the underlying Child Care and Development Block Grant. And it's not a strategic plan that represents the work of the agency and the direction we're going in. We will be developing that. We have one now. We're in the last year of it. This board will take on the process, and we'll start that at the strategic planning retreat in August of our own strategic plan and where we want to go as an agency. This is much more of an administrative report to the federal government. And if you did have a chance to look through it, you would see that what it reflects is the work that we've been doing, that we've shared here, that we've reflected with all of you, the rate work, the alternative methodology, the research, the child care financial assistance changes, C3. So it is a reflection of the work that this board has directed us and partnered with us in doing. So with that, I'll turn it over to the team, and I just want to say this is another large-scale task that's been going on at this time, and Tyrese, thank you for your leadership, and Jocelyn as well, and then Leah Jack, who some of you may be meeting for the first time, who works in our strategy and project management team and has been an incredible leader and coordinator. So I'm so happy to see you here and to recognize your work. And I know I share everyone who touches the state plan's gratitude for your amazing work and keeping us on track. So with that, and if it's not working, I will drive for you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Oh, do you want me to kick it off?
You can try, but the clicker isn't always working.
Yes, so as the Commissioner mentioned, my name is Leah Jack. I'm a project manager here, and I have had the pleasure of working with individuals across the organization to get this done, and even some people at EOE. So thank you to everyone who has been involved in the work so far. It's been a lot, and we are happy to share our progress with you today. So let's see if this is working. Nope, it's not
Okay,
working.
there you go. Just pointed at me, Leah. I got you.
Thanks. So I will be kicking us off today to go over the scope and timeline. Just very quickly, the OCC has asked that we meet requirements to report on activities, progress, spending, and programming in the following 10 areas. I will not read out each of them, but they are there, and it is how the state plan is organized and how we've tried to organize some of our documentation as well. Toward the bottom of the presentation is the timeline that we followed. So we began planning in January and came to the board in February. It was a very quick, like 5-minute overview, 2-minute of what we plan to do in the following months. And throughout March, April, and May, we engaged with stakeholders and also collected public comment. We were able to finalize the state plan recently, and we are here today seeking your approval to submit it to the OCC. And then hopefully we can do that ahead of the July 1 deadline. Right now, we are tracking to meet that deadline. So I will hand it over now
No pressure to the
all
board.
No pressure, but it all depends on you. All depends on you.
So now I'll hand it over to Tyrese to share a little bit more about the state plan.
Thank you, Commissioner. So Commissioner actually just gave you the background and overview of what the state plan is, but CCDF is really what funds a lot of our funding of our subsidies, our program quality, as well as our workforce supports and our other initiatives around like consumer education. We are required as a part of receiving that funding to complete this state plan, which is just an administrative requirement. The state plan is really our what, our why, and our how we do the work that we do here at EEC, and it directly connects to our current 5 strategic objectives. What else you see on this slide is really just talking about how long the state plan is in place for. It's a 3-year cycle. Our current cycle will end September of 2024, and then the new plan will be effective from July 1 of 2024 to September 2027. What I want to highlight is the state plan is actually like an active living document. So as we make changes and we make improvements over the 3 years, our responsibility is to update the plan so it aligns to the work that we're doing. So as the commissioner said, it's not really what we're looking ahead to do, it's what we're currently doing, and it's reflective of our policies and our practices and the data that we use to tell our story of the work that we're doing.
And well, you could, but we do many amendments during the course of
Yes.
the year. So when you all voted to implement that rate increase, we would do an amendment to the state plan because that would have changed what we told them 6 months ago about
Amendment
how we were
5.
doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So as the board takes action, as the agency takes actions, as our procurement moves forward, we will continue to amend the plan to reflect the work that's ongoing at the agency.
Absolutely. So we, with our FCC approval, we'll do an amendment for that as well. So we'll submit amendments actually up into the approval of the new state plan. So our current state plan had some old things and some new things. This new state plan will directly align to the 5 strategic objectives, which we'll go over pretty quickly today. 2 of them you see are family access and program stability. We've highlighted here the sections of the state plan that are directly connected to each strategic objective. In the area of family access, it is all things child care financial assistance. So it's going to talk about our eligibility, our eligibility for enrollment. It's going to talk about childcare affordability, which is family co-pays. Parental choice, equal access is directly connected to our reimbursement rates for our providers, as well as in that section, we talk about alternative methodology. And then the plan section 9 is directly connected to family outreach. How do families know what's available in their community, and how do we ensure that they do that? Jocelyn?
Thank you. On the program stability side, this is both connect all the sections about CCDF payment practices, program expectations. Those are all connected to the ways in which we're supporting programs, as well as obviously we are thinking about all the other systems that support programs such as C3. But the plan itself focuses on the role of the subsidy payments on that side. Next one. In thinking about program quality and the workforce supports, I think on the program quality side, we've talked about this before, there's both the health and safety requirements and expectations of programs that there's a lot of reporting and planning on. The ways in which we're supporting the workforce, though, is a very important component of the way in which we're supporting program quality holistically. And there are a number of places where we're able to call out some of the workforce initiatives that we have going on in terms of, sort of like what our current certification requirements are, the planning for future. As well as the types of funded supports for professional learning and for program quality that we have in place, and for program quality improvement, which is the ways in which programs themselves are able to support their educators in learning and growing. And then on the workforce support side, obviously, all of those things play into account as well, but in particular, that section on how we're supporting a skilled and well-compensated childcare workforce. One thing that's also nice about this section, and it gives us an opportunity again to think about C3 in the way it's supporting educator compensation. So it comes together, it's just organized in the particular way that this plan is organized. You go to the next slide. I'm not going to spend time on this, but I think you've seen this before, and this really highlights all the different initiatives that we have that are related to these different areas of the plan, both in terms of how these initiatives cross different goals for the agency, but all of these are things that we were able to reference in different ways throughout the plan.
So the plan essentially just tells Massachusetts' story.
Current story, yeah.
Yeah, current story.
It's a good story.
And then the last slide is regarding the engagement and feedback that we received. So we actually participated in 6 engagement sessions across the state. And I want to emphasize the word participation. We wanted to leverage as many existing forums as possible to kind of, because of the work that we've already done as an organization, to build those relationships with our stakeholders. And so we started off in February at the board meeting, and then we attended the Advisory and Workforce Advisory Council meeting in March. And then in early April, we attended the Massachusetts Head Start Association Directors Meeting and the Community Preschool Partnership Initiative, Tuesdays at 2 grantees meeting. And then we did have to have one session that was hosted specifically by us, and that was our public hearing. That's required by the OCC to do. And now we are here again at the board meeting to share with you all the progress that we've made and to seek your vote. We did receive 70 comments, and of those 70 comments, there were 23 organizations represented. But when you look at the attendance across the sessions that we attended, it's actually upwards of 60 organizations that we were able to interact with to get feedback on our state plan. And of those 70 comments, we actually received 12 accolades on the work that the organization has already done. So with that.
Well, Leah, let me just mention that at your chairs, because we got it to you a little bit late, is the memo that the
Yes.
team under Leah's leadership has put together, which summarizes kind of the public comments. I don't know if you want to just take a couple minutes to highlight what's in the memo, so before the board's asked to vote, they have a sense of sort of
Yes.
what kinds of comments we got and
Yeah.
how they fit in.
Yeah, so we really got comments that ran the gamut. So we received comments on our C3 program. We received comments on how well we responded to needs during the pandemic. We got comments on desire to look at our payment rates and how we're supporting families, how we're supporting programs. We really got comments on almost every section except for section 10 because, compliance isn't that fun. We did get a lot of really good feedback. It was shared with all of the leaders here so that they'll be able to take that and run with it for this next plan year as we are developing and moving forward with our strategic objectives.
And integrated into
Yes,
the
it's
plan as
yeah.
well.
It's integrated. What I will add to that is that a lot of the feedback are things that we've already been thinking about or things we have already started having conversations around or things that I'm probably going to talk about shortly that are included in our the 2024 final rule. A lot of them are around pushing us to look at barriers even closer, increasing access, not just for our families, but looking at how can we better support the providers in some of the areas around like professional development and support and maybe other like employment-related supports. And then we received some feedback around ensuring that we're just lifting up our out-of-school time providers, especially our after-school folks, calling them out. And so we did that in every section where they're referenced, including our family child care providers and educators.
So you do have a copy of the memo, and again, apologies for getting it to you so late, but I would say overall, it was, I think we had really important comments around after-school and out-of-school time and
We
making
did.
sure that in everything we're doing, we're calling that out, lifting it up, whether it's our reg reform or childcare financial assistance, recognizing the unique nature of those programs and the staff that work there. But overall, I feel like a lot of it was like, do more, go faster. Like, we like the direction you're heading in. Can you get there faster? Can you go there deeper? Can you do that? So that's very reassuring, and we agree. We'd like to get there faster, and you'll see some of that in the next part of the presentation as well. But if the board has questions for the team on the state plan. And again, opportunities to amend it as we go. So thank you all so much, and the 25 people who are who also contributed that aren't sitting at the dais. But
I just, again, I think it's important to recognize how much work this is for you guys and your teams that are behind you to do this work and appreciate it. And, I jokingly said it's a good story to tell, but I think when you just look at the other agenda items of today, C3 alone, like, it is a good story to tell. And you all in the department are really, I think, in this continuous improvement mindset of just always trying to do better and do more for children, families, and providers. And you can feel that. And this is just probably a lot of work, but I hope also some pride in being able to actually just document all the good stuff you're doing, as well as thinking about what the future holds as well.
tomorrow we'll feel
Thank
that.
you.
No, I know. We haven't voted yet. Let's
Oh,
see.
all right, maybe not. Yeah, right, maybe not. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments before we move to a vote?
Just thank you.
Thank you.
So I would make a motion that the Board of Early Education and Care, subject to revision by the Commissioner, approves the department's process to finalize the Commonwealth's Child Care Development Fund state plan for federal fiscal years 2025 to 2007, and authorizes the department to submit the finalized CCDF state plan to the administration for children and families by June 30th, 2024 on its behalf. Can I get a
Second.
second by Carolyn? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you, guys. Yeah. And I think we're going to take just a 5-minute break to reset, and then we'll invite the res team up.
Well, we have one more on this.
Oh, on this,
so,
okay.
Yeah,
All
and
right.
then we'll
All
do.
right. right, we're back. Thank you, everybody, for your patience as we take a quick break, and we'll welcome back Tyrese and the Commissioner to talk about the 2024 CCDF final rule.
Yeah. So in connection with the CCDF plan, the federal government, when they roll out a new policy or change to their regulation, they do that in the form of a final rule. And so effective April 30th, there was the 2024 CCDF final rule was rolled out. What we did here is just trying to provide a little context to like what is the final rule and what does it really do. It implements or revises an existing federal agency regulation, or it could also rescind a regulation or make any kind of change. What this new rule actually does is it's making some improvements in 3 areas. So it's better payment practices for our providers, lower cost for families, and easier and faster enrollment for families. And on the provider side, making it better to participate with us through CCDF. So here we just broke down the benefits of the rule. So lower cost for families, more childcare options, easier and faster enrollment. A lot of the work that we've already started doing through our CCFA regulatory changes and reforms are direct alignment with what this final rule is asking states to do. On the provider side, the benefits to the rule, it's telling states we need you to do better at stabilizing payment practices for providers. If we stabilize payment practices to providers, it'll make it easier for providers to want to participate in childcare financial assistance. And also the other side is to ensure that payments are more closely aligned to the actual costs of care. So the provisions of the rule is broken out into 2 categories, encouraged and requirements. And so we broke them out for you. There are 6 requirements. That means all the states, these are the must-haves, like the states must implement these provisions of the rule. The first 2 are ones that EEC will be requesting a waiver for, and they are capping copays for families at 7%. And the other one is paying providers prospectively. I'm happy to share that the other 4 we've already implemented either through our CCFA current practice or through our regulatory reforms. Those are payment by enrollment to providers, some contracts and grants were there that are prioritizing infants and toddlers in underserved areas, as well as children with disabilities, building a non-traditional hour supply for childcare providers, and then ensuring we minimize disruptions to families in our eligibility procedures and policies. We've already done that. We're doing the work around grants and contracts, of course, through our contracted provider procurement that's active now, which is, as I said, directly in alignment. The waiver process I'll go over a little bit later, but we'll be requesting the waiver. We have 2 years. The waiver would give us 2 years to come into compliance with the 7% family copay cap and paying providers prospectively. Do we think it'll take us 2 years? Probably not, as we are already moving some of that work.
Let me just jump in for a second. And so we speak in CCDF language, but we are supportive of both of these 2 provisions. We just haven't implemented them yet. So we're seeking a waiver for time to be able to do that implementation. So their requirements, we intend to comply with them. We think they're the right direction to go in. There was a huge amount of work done on the sliding fee scale. We are not that far off on the 7%, but we would need an opportunity to analyze what the cost impact would be to moving to 7%, especially as we think about increasing eligibility up to 85% and having those families come in. So it would also be some IT changes. And really, on the providers paying them prospectively, I really like this one personally because one of the things we're really focused on here is making sure that the experience of families receiving child care financial assistance is like any other family. Just because they're paid by us shouldn't mean that they're treated differently or it feels differently for a program or provider. And so for those of you who use child care, you pay prospectively. You typically would pay at the end of June for July. And so we want our providers and the families to have the same experience as anyone else doing, participating in the system. So paying providers prospectively is good for families, is also good for providers. Right now, they might receive a reimbursement up to 6 weeks after having delivered the service. And that can be a deterrent for especially smaller programs from wanting to participate in child care financial assistance. So each of these changes will help us continue. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that we are very aligned with the federal government, right? Like a lot of the changes that we all have been making to make things more affordable, to make them more accessible, to make it easier, to see our role as facilitating access, not complying with rules, is the message we're getting from our federal partners now. And that's great. We're not doing these things despite them. We're doing it as part of a sort of state-federal partnership on moving the system forward towards
Maybe
greater.
they're watching our board meetings.
Yeah, I think
They are.
how could they not be?
How could they not?
Yeah. So, sorry, Tyrese.
No, that was a good segue to what the encouragements are within the final rule. And so the encouragements are things that, either we were our existing policy or that we, as I already said, rolled out into some of our reform work. But there is so much direct alignment that even where we're very close, as I'll go over shortly, like even though in the areas where we're like very close, where we were already considering some of the things that they're encouraging. And so one of the big things they're encouraging is waiving co-pays for different populations. So families experiencing homelessness, we made that big change. Children with disabilities, and then waiving co-pays for anyone that's between 100 and 150 FPL. We're already waiving fees up to 100% FPL, so we're almost
poverty
there.
level?
Yeah, federal poverty level, sorry, my acronyms. Are we waiving fees for children with disabilities? Some of them we are, right? Through some of our programs, naturally that's happening, but it would require us to put something specifically in our policy language that's saying that we're waiving it for all children with disabilities. We do increase the initial entry eligibility for children with disabilities up to 85% SMI. So it's something that we'll take into consideration as we're working through what the rule is asking us to do. For families that are in foster care, children in foster care, we already waive fees for children in foster care as well as our TANF families. And then the waivers in the rule is asking us to also waive fees, encouraging us to waive fees for our Head Start families. So we know that most Head Start families are going to fall within that 100% FPL. And so by design, we kind of already are waiving some of the Head Start families. But we also know some Head Start families are over income, right? They're over the 100% federal poverty level. So it would require us also implementing a policy change in our existing policy. And then the last four are related to using other public benefit programs for enrollment. We do that with our DCF, with our Department of Children and Families, and our Department of Transitional Assistance Families. Another group we could put in there would eventually be Head Start if we decide to make that policy change. And then this idea of presumptive eligibility. So currently we have presumptive eligibility, we just call it provisional. So we provide provisional authorizations for families who may need additional time to acquire a service need or other eligibility requirements. So what we're looking at there is it may just require a simple language change in our existing policy to address other eligibility, other presumptive eligibility needs. And then the last two is pay providers their full established rate. We currently already do that in our with our existing reimbursement rates. And the last one is online enrollment procedures. And this speaks directly to what we want to do in modernizing our modernization efforts, right? And so we're on our way, right? It started, we have here our digital application and our case tracker. That was our pilot. I like to call it, it's our interim way, right? We're running a marathon, and so hopefully we'll get there where we have a better online enrollment process.
We're only at 5K right now.
Yes. we would need significant system changes. And so what are our next steps? Commissioner kind of alluded to some of this. We're going to be doing assessing our needs, right? What are the cost implications for the required provisions of the rule? What else do we need to change? Are there simple policy changes? What data do we need to collect? We're looking at identifying our internal and external stakeholders. Collaboration and partnership is what we believe, and so we want to make sure that we're talking to the folks that could be impacted by the changes, and then we would move to developing a roadmap for the change and then draft our waiver. These are very high level. Our intent is to submit the waiver before November 30th.
Any questions for Tyrese?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tyrese. I'm going to move us back now and invite our residential regulation reform team up.
As you get seated, just want to thank you for the flexibility on this schedule.
Sure.
It's great to see many of you back here to update us from the last time you were here when this kind of got up and running. So we're looking forward to hearing about the work that's been underway.
And I think it might be terrific if each of you just introduce yourself first to the board members, because I don't think they've had a chance to meet all of you yet.
All right, well, thank you, Commissioner, for having us. And the board. I'm Margie Gilberti, and I'm an associate commissioner, and I've had the great opportunity of being able to help this team with the reg revision work. And so our two project managers are Susan Habchi and Tiffany Bassi, and they're working very closely, also part of the team, Tim Keene and Kelly Buckley, who are the residential and placement supervisors.
Okay,
Welcome.
thank you.
Okay.
So, I can kick it off. Okay. So thank you, board member, secretary, commissioner, for having us back. So some of you might remember we were here last May around the same time where we did a real in-depth presentation on who we were, the residential and placement unit, and the type of programs that we licensed. Today, I'm not going to give it as detailed, but I'll do a quick recap of our unit. There are 11 licensors who sit throughout the state, and then the two supervisors, myself and Tim, who supervise the licensors. We oversee residential programs, which are group care and temporary shelter programs. We also license placement agencies, and under placement agencies, that includes foster care and adoption. So our programs, who are our programs? All residential programs can serve children from birth through 21. Children and youth are in placements for a variety of different reasons, with service needs ranging from behavioral, cognitive issues, educational, mental health issues, even criminal involvement. So thus, our regulations are very broad to cover the areas that can serve the different types of kids, keeping consistent throughout health and safety. That's the most pivotal thing in all of the work that we do with our regulations. Our licenses, there are two licenses which are issued under our programs, a group care or a shelter. So the group care license, that really meets the needs of kids on a longer term basis that are in programs. Where a shelter program, there is a limit of 45 days. That's really a good assessment, stabilization, but they could stay longer than 45 days if they needed a few extra weeks, but it's really meant to meet short-term needs versus the group care programs that they meet the more complex needs that some of the kids may have. So as you can see, the data currently shows how many programs are licensed by EEC and approximately how many children with each of the different types of programs are served. So this slide shows the different types of programs under group care and under shelter, and there's also within that different referral sources. So any type of group care program or shelter program have a variety of different funding sources. It could be DCF, it could be DMH, it could be the school system, and in some cases even parents who can refer kids. in either of those settings. So I'm going to pass it over to Tim, who's going to talk about the frameworks of our regs.
Thanks, Kelly. As you can see by that last slide, a lot of the different programs that we run have a very wide scope of programming, anywhere from teen parenting to youth that are adjudicated, incarcerated in locked facilities, res ed facilities dealing with very specific residents with high acuity rates. So this one set of regulations is kind of put in place for that group, but as you can imagine, we have a lot of other partners and collaborators within that system. And as Kelly alluded to, from a referral source standpoint, you know, you've got DCF, certainly DMH, Department of Youth Services, DESE, although they don't refer necessarily directly, they have a regulatory oversight, but also a governance that's related to the LEAs to make sure that the placements of these particular youth are available as much as possible, which is a great deal, a big issue for our care, as well as we understand just the general workforce in the Commonwealth. Up to and including our relationships with DESE on a regulatory basis, we also have a lot of collaboration with them. They oversee really the oversight and expertise around the educational components of these res ed facilities. So there's a great deal of need for us to partner to make sure that our residential environments and the education environments are collaborating in safe environments for kids. Up to and inclusive of the OCA, we do a lot of work with the Office of Child Advocate to make sure that our information is available to them and to other state agencies. There is a meeting on a regular basis that we attend with all of these folks at any given time. We also have overlap with outside agencies outside the state. Schools place kids in Massachusetts res ed facilities, not necessarily group care, but we're continually asked by these other states for assurances that the programs are safe for their kids. Some of them have their own process where they might come in and look at the schools, but we also have that as a main collaborator because we've got a great deal of kids from out of the Commonwealth in placement. And of course, the most vital to all of the work that we have is really the parents, the youth specifically that are served in these environments, but guardians and families are a vital partner that we continue to try and access and work with to make sure these programs are safe for kids. Next, I will kick off the purpose of our regulatory revisions. They're very old.
It's been a while, right?
It's been a bit, yeah. So, but in general, thankfully, we've had many attempts at altering them along the way when it was really needed. Last specifically was 2015 when there was a real push around the knowledge of knowing prone restraints were really bad. Thankfully, we were not in a place where we had major incidents that occurred in our state, but followed the lead of the federal guidelines around trying to eliminate as much as possible hands-on with youth in our program. So those regulations were, again, collaboratively, we worked with other state agencies to make sure that they were done correctly, that we didn't just remove that we made sure that there was meaningful things put in place. Trauma-informed care was very, very huge adaptation at that time to help our programs rethink how they were approaching those issues. But in general, our overall revision now is focused on making sure that we're going to improve the entirety of the regulations for the residential programs. And by doing so, really kind of fostering and promoting a collaborative effort to ensure that, again, that the environments are safe and supportive, but also unbiased environments for our youth to meet their highest potential. And again, the main piece of our approach will certainly center around considering including the voices of those that are impacted directly by these regulations. Again, youth as well as staff, as well as parents and families. And with that, I will pass it on to Tiffany.
I just wanted to say if there's any questions before we dig into the changes of the regs, just in terms of who we are, what we license, for anyone that has not heard the spiel before. Happy to answer any questions.
I mean, as we kind of go, I'm just curious. I remember when you were here when we teed up this work, and it has been a while, right? I mean, and made necessary adjustments, but I'm just curious as the subject matter experts with proximity to this work every day, what your learnings have been as you've kind of dug into this process just as a professional in this space, right? And trying to think about what the vision looks forward, and we can do that throughout the presentation, but I just would love to hear just your own perspective on this work so far.
Sure.
Great. Well, thank you, Tim. So as Tim said, these are really old regulations, and we've evolved, and we want to be the best here in Massachusetts. So these are our overarching objectives. We really want to engage the families and have the voices of the staff, parents, providers, and have everyone have a stake. We want to align with our regulatory bodies. Again, we want to make sure they're inclusive, unbiased, and they meet the needs and the youth at the forefront. We're going to update language, make sure we're addressing being positive, proactive, addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion in these regulations. We also want to be transparent and work towards achieving the excellence that is already happening. We're going to coordinate policies and procedures to promote the successfulness of these, as well as supporting a skilled workforce. We know that nationwide there's a workforce crisis. So we want to promote the staff, we want to provide professional development, and just enhance the workforce altogether, as well as continuously working on our strategic plan. So the areas of reform, we know that there's challenges, and we need to work on those both, internally as well as with our partners. So we want to center the experience with the youth and the families. We want to eliminate any outdated provisions. We want to streamline for better efficiency. And we're going to do all of this because we've done extensive research on all 49 states on best practices for evidence-based and trauma-informed care, while minimizing financial impact. Next, Susan will talk about the key components that we're looking to revise.
So in consideration of the overarching objectives, the data that we collected, the feedback that we received, although the entire document is under revision, these 8 changes are the most significant, so we've opted to point them out to you here and answer any questions that you may have about them. So continuing to include the voices of those being served and further promoting that, conscientious public posting of noncompliance and accountability, development of a skilled and supported workforce, a shift to a more proactive, supportive, positive approach to behavior support, updates to minimum hiring requirements, the use of inclusive language throughout the document. There's a lot of outdated language as well throughout the document. The promotion of continuous quality improvement within programs, and the creation of a more accessible, reader-friendly companion document to the regulations. So I immediately saw, what's this companion document? So we talked about
I
how
asked
difficult.
myself that as soon as you said it.
We talked about how difficult it is to follow the regulations as they are. There's a lot of legalese, there's a lot of reference to 606 this and this and that, and there's a lot of bouncing around to kind of keep track of what you're trying to follow. So our hope is to create a companion document that makes the document more accessible for everyone, makes it easier to read, and also promotes compliance.
And that would be making sure parents can
Yes.
getting in and reading the regulations, like that's a curiosity. It's a term. It's an art, understanding regulations, and we have some people who are skilled in that art. But for our parents and for our providers to be able to implement the regulations in the spirit in which they are intended, we really feel like there needs to be a companion document that explains, that helps, translate the regulatory language into programmatic expectations in different ways, and then for the providers themselves and our licensing staff.
Can you talk a little bit about what thoughtful transparency would mean? I don't know if it's me should take it or anyone else wants to take it.
I'm happy to start. might be a good. So, our residential and group homes serve some of the kids with the most complex needs, many involved with DCF, as you know. And so there are sort of very important confidentiality issues and safety issues associated with where kids are. And, what we, on the child care side, we post noncompliances around child care programs is a federal requirement. We don't have that same federal requirement in our residential world. Again, there are some safety and confidentiality concerns with some of our kids. So we've been looking at a lot of what other states are doing. So trying to balance the important information for placement agencies, so the DCF or DMH or the local LEAs who are choosing programs, or parents whose children are being placed or they're choosing to place, what information do they need to be able to know their kid's going somewhere that they can feel safe and confident about that placement, while also not giving away important confidential information about the kids. So that is sort of that's the complex needle that this group is trying to thread along with our external partners. So working with the providers and talking to families about what is the most important information you need to know, and then talking to providers about what could be posted that wouldn't compromise some of the concerns providers might have about their own staff safety or the kids that are being served. So that is our thoughtful, transparent kind of
In our goal.
artful work that we're trying to do in terms of making sure information that we know about programs is more accessible, while balancing some of the other concerns. You guys feel free to add.
To piggyback on the document that you were referring to, we're also taking a look at where would more policy development help to also clarify certain regulations for both the program and for parents or referral sources. Oh, that's what that reg means. So one of the things we learned going through the regs, although we may know, once we started having other folks who perhaps weren't as familiar with the regs, and not everything belongs in reg, but we really targeted some areas that we need to do a little bit more policy development, because that's where your prescriptive, detailed information can go. So,
And I'm just curious, would those be people that are experiencing the system, right? Like, and they still, right, so, yeah, that's great.
Right, and we might have regulations that specify certain things, and then you have sub-regulatory language or
Yeah.
policy language that talks about how to
Right.
implement, right? So
Yes.
if the regulations are effectively the sort of what is required from a regulatory standpoint, and then the sub-regulatory documents can explain more of like how to implement it, or what the expectations, what we would want to see when we're out at a program, to know that that regulation is being complied with.
And I think that exists in any field, right? It's almost
Sure.
like the rules of engagement here of how we're going to work together, and how we're, like, if people aren't clear on what that means for them, it's hard. Yeah, it's great.
Can I just ask a quick question? Is regulation primarily focused on, you said it was sort of primarily focused on health and safety issues, and it seems like given the variety of different types of programs, that the quality question might be something that happens elsewhere? Is that where some of these other partner agencies come in? Or I see that, there's a focus on sort of continuous quality improvement. Are you setting specific quality recommendations and requirements as well? Like, do you have oversight over how well these programs are functioning, and if they are doing the thing that they set out to do?
I think it's a balance of, that's why we kind of highlighted the collaboration that we
Yeah.
have to do in these programs, because we don't control the funding necessarily, but also don't want to duplicate. DCF, for example,
Sure.
does have a CQI element built into their contracts with programs, so we don't want to undercut that. We don't want to say you can do less, right? But we definitely have what's referred to as a statement of purpose. We have about 40 different documents that are submitted for licensure. The statement of purpose is really vital for us to be able to help hold the program accountable to the different level of care they're doing, because you really are looking at one set of regulations that are just such a wide variety of youth that's being served under that.
Yeah.
So that quality could mean different things. It might mean less of a preservation issue for a particular, part of the population. We'd really want them to be focusing much more on their enrichment and community access.
Yes.
So it isn't as, and the commissioner challenged us to do some of this, as far as like, can we break it out in a more meaningful way in our regulations, and have sections that speak specifically to different types of care versus that. But it is it's definitely a partnership, because we do know we don't want to over inundate people who already are providing DCF, for example, with their CQI planning. But we're looking at that as well as we venture down this road.
Agencies that have their respective contracts for these types of things, right? Like the local educational agency, the child's got there through their IEP, right?
Yeah.
It's up to the district to ensure that the IEP is being implemented.
Sure.
And then like for DMH-run facilities, DMH has to ensure that those providers are doing what the contract with DMH says, and same thing with DCF for their
Okay,
congregate
yeah,
cares.
yeah, that makes
So it
sense.
really depends on who's the partner,
Right,
right?
right,
And then there's an issue of the health and safety regulations and what needs to happen. I mean, it goes into detail, like even on like water temperature and things of that nature. But it's the responsibility for the oversight is really primarily with the provider that's engaged in that service.
And do require clinical services and family engagement and physical facility requirements. So all of our regs somehow all tie back to both health and safety and quality.
Yes.
And it can just vary depending on the type of program and then taking into consideration the different contracts. But the regs are intended to meet quality as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So my question is, does that then, has that in the past led to conflict among your collaborators? And is one of the purposes that we want to clarify sort of areas of authority? Or is,
That's a great question.
So we,
I think it brings up the question of why EEC licenses all these programs, frankly, which was a decision made long before now. But I mean, yeah, like local educational agencies and DESE have the expertise regarding the educational programs, right, in terms of what they provide and how they provide it. Just the same way that, you know, DCF, DYS, DMH, you know, they have certain types of services and programmings that they provide, and they have that area of expertise. So I don't know how this all came to be, but it is the way that it was set up. But, you know, having worked in some programs that have been licensed by EEC, I think they do an incredibly thorough job at what they do. How it got there and like landed there, that's a different question that I think goes back decades. So, not
The
sure.
to the creation of the agency. I mean, it came with us when the agency was created because we were the licensing entity of childcare programs. And I should say, you know, it's very much integrated. So our legal team, our investigations team, our licensing teams are out in our regions. It's very much integrated into the licensing work of the agency. So the history of the Office of Child Care as the licensing agency, where both child care and residential licensing sat, came over with the agency when it was initially created. And to Linda's question, and also Nikki's in some ways, you know, so it's not completely a bright line, but we do the licensing. Our primary relationship is with the provider. And what's happening sort of with the facility and the program. But DCF, the local education agencies, you know, and DMH will have contracts that set quality expectations, service expectations, clinical expectations, and we have a very strong collaborative relationship with all of those agencies. So if there's an incident that happens, we collaborate on investigations. If there's a challenge associated with an individual child and that placement not being the right placement or the right placement not being available for that child, there's collaboration that happens among the agencies too. But there is overlap among the agencies in terms of these programs. And, you know, as with Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and the local education agencies, so we license the residential side, so where the kids live, right? Whether it's in a group home where they don't have a residential school associated, or there's an educational school that's associated where kids also live, and we do the residential side of it. But we collaborate really closely. Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, they set the standards for the educational side that part of the day, and we set the standards for what happens in the residences. And there is required and necessary collaboration, whether it's over individual children or overall at the program level. And the regulatory reform efforts, the first set of engagements is really with our state agency partners to make sure that when we are revising them, they aren't duplicative or conflictual with DCF requirements on contracts or Department of Elementary and Secondary Education requirements on the residential school side. So it's a complicated landscape. I mean, if you think about childcare, maybe this goes to part of your question, Carolyn, too. Like, we're sort of all things. We license, we fund, right? On the residential side, we do that in collaboration with other state agencies, which isn't necessarily a challenge, but it does matter that there's a collaborative structure in which common expectations for providers are being communicated and operationally
implemented.
Well, it's an opportunity for clarification at this point,
right.
right, if we're revising them. So.
Right.
And I think in the most critical times, the model itself is set up, and this isn't to go against what we have built for childcare, but it forces the conversation around if we're in a place where we think an environment's not safe, but DCF or the referral source needs the beds, as we all know they need, and they're not put in a position where they're going to have to decide safety versus, placement.
Yeah.
It drives conversations with the folks that sit at the table, that team that works on overseeing contracts. So I think it's been helpful in that respect, that I think not speaking for DCF, but it helps us put forth our standards of saying, this environment's not safe, we need an enrollment freeze, we need to do these other things. And then we collaborate with the referral source and their team to make sure the right kids are placed. They'll get at the table and remove potentially one or two youth that really just aren't appropriate for that program at that time, to restabilize it. We're all in the same business of trying to make sure we're not putting any of these programs out of business. We need the beds, but.
And the commissioner took the words right out of my mouth. It's exactly, I think because of our statute and our regs, we all have different things that we're looking at, but we all are looking perhaps at an incident or a situation at a program because that's our job, and we care about the kids, and we want to support the program, and the Commonwealth needs beds. Sometimes we just go about doing it in a different way, and I think we've done a great job throughout the years with our collaboration with the different agencies, so that we're not repeating what one agency is doing. And I think our line has been, whether it's with DESE, we communicate all the time, but the school is what they're dealing with, and the residences are and with DCF the same. If there's an investigation going on, we collaborate right from the beginning. They're looking at their statute very, specifically, and then ours is a little bit broader, but we really partner and collaborate and do that. And it's worked well.
Thanks.
Yeah, I will say, I have, and Tim alluded to this, but I've challenged the team to be aspirational as we think about who's working in the programs, what we expect of the programs, and our oversight of the programs, so that we are a leader around residential programming, across the country. And we've also talked a lot about sort of compliances and how to think about compliances, right? Like health and safety compliance, or something that is putting, that makes us worried about a kid versus an administrative or policy non-compliance is another area where we've talked about making sure that we're much clearer. So for programs, for our licensing staff, and for parents, that what a non-compliance means in licensing. And the other thing I'll just say that I'm not a professional in this field, they are, but I'm learning with, from the team that having a set of regulations that governs kids that have such a broad range of needs, right? Young parents who are trying to move on their economic mobility path, all the way to children who are profoundly autistic. It's complicated to set residential regulations and expectations for such a very broad group. So this team has been tackling a lot of those questions.
It made me think about the origins. They went with, whoever designed this went with the expertise.
They did.
Right? Which is what you guys bring to this. And so where it sits is always could be debated, but it's the expertise that, it's good stuff.
The level of responsibility is huge.
Yeah.
But also the opportunity to impact quality talk about the most vulnerable.
Yes.
That many times have no voice. So thank you for doing that work.
So as the commissioner and the team has talked about, we know engagement is the most critical part of this project, right? So we talked to the licensing team and found out what their aspirations are and how they can implement these proposed regulations to day. We've also talked to other agencies. We've started that engagement, and we will continue that engagement. We are going to utilize sister agencies to help us. For example, DCF offered to assist us with their youth advisory board and parents and guardians, so we can get that voice of the youth perspective, as well as the families, parents, and guardians perspective. And as I said, we are going to continue to obtain information from all of our sister agencies. And in April of 2024, we did an online survey that we sent to all residential programs and stakeholders, asking them a series of questions about how they felt on some of the proposed revisions. And thus far, we've received 48 responses from agencies. This is my favorite slide. So what have we done in this time frame? So we've done a lot of work, I think, and this team. So first and foremost, we've started with engagement with work groups, meeting with residential providers. We have done national research to inform our decision making. And we have done our initial review of the regulations and made our revisions and our suggestions. And then our plan is to go back to the provider community, have those conversations, and then adapt them again. We've also met with our workforce and technology team, and subject to appropriations, we would like to do an EEC R&P Essentials. So currently in childcare, we have an online portal which has online trainings for for all of the GSA and FCC. And so we would love to have some core universal trainings for all of the residential programs.
So at the last board meeting, we shared some updates on our learning management system called Strong Start, and we updated our EC Essentials. It's federally required. It's about 12 hours of training that anyone working in one of the programs must take before, now all of it, before they work in that program. And we've updated it. Now we're on EC Essentials 2.0, so it's much more interactive, and it's really an explanation of the regulatory expectations and for staff working in programs and some key policy areas. So the team, for example, has thought about really doing something like that for our residential programs, which would be, I think, really helpful. And it goes to the sort of companion resources that would help set.
How does this regulatory stuff actually apply to day to day?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
And so I said we are looking for the core universal trainings that all programs, no matter what their population is, can take. And then, as mentioned, we surveyed all of the providers. And we basically just want to ask their opinions and see how we can foster that relationship and support them. So in closing, we envision our next steps to continue engagement, to continue to put systems in place such as workflows, policies, procedures, the companion document to ensure a smooth rollout that is, when it's approved, to make sure that we have everything in place. So there are no bumps. We know there will be bumps, but we've learned from other rollouts that we want to have all these in place before we actually have the rollout.
So we would anticipate, I hope, coming back to the board with actually redline regulations and the summary of the changes in the fall. And as you're all aware, your action would be to approve those to be sent out for public comments. And there would be a public comment period, finalization of the regs, promulgation of the regs with the board's approval, and then an implementation period where we would support providers in sort of understanding what the changes are and the implementation of them. So we're a couple years out probably from full implementation, but we're well on our way thanks to the work of this team.
Any questions?
Appreciate the engaging conversation. Like this is, and it's just great to have an update and hear from you guys about the process and the update on when, where to go from here as it relates to our role in this and recognizing all of the effort that you and the people that have provided public comment and your teams and providers are doing to help ensure that these regulations meet kind of what we want it to today, right? And not 15 years ago or 8 years ago, so it's good stuff.
Just for curiosity, I'm sure there's a capacity issue, with at these programs, especially post-COVID, and we're seeing it at the childcare level too. Do we see an increase in the number of programs, or anybody trying to get in? Do we license these programs? How do they go about opening a program? Do they contact you?
We've been getting calls.
Yeah. We've been getting a lot of calls.
Huge
So
demand.
I think
Huge demand.
there is.
Okay.
And there's enough beds. Currently, I think capacity-wise, there's enough beds, but there's not enough staff to support the amount of beds of providers, because in the past, providers have run at higher numbers. I don't have them specifically, but the same players stayed open through COVID. It's just to point that out too. Everybody still had to be open with this population. It was a challenge for us as far as being able to still make sure they were safe environments. We made folks walk around with iPads to show us different spaces in the buildings because we knew that we couldn't go into their environments. But yeah, we've had, Department of Youth Services has recently kind of restructured the way that they're doing some of their work, especially with female services. And so we pivot when that happens and background record check is affected. We have to get people to try and help get these programs launched in a quick way. So I don't know that there's necessarily a whole bunch of new programming, new contracting going out, but people trying to get back up to the because the capacity's there. DCF needs beds, DMH as well. I mean, everybody does need the access to the beds, and they're physically there, and they're in environments that are already been licensed and safe. But we can't get enough staff kind of trained up and
Okay, so same.
in order to watch.
Yes.
Right, exactly, yeah.
I think that's very important to kind of piggyback on what Tim said. We all know that workforce is an issue, nationwide. But particularly in this space, workforce development and support is critically important, with an emphasis on the support piece, which is why we started to think about what can we do not only to attract people, to get people to pay attention to this position and how critically important it is. I mean, these jobs are so important, but I think that the emphasis and the respect that we give to the people that do these jobs, we need to put a little bit more into that support and recognition, letting people know that there is a career pathway, that this is an extremely important job that they're doing. And again, circle back to support. They're getting in the door, but then letting them know that they have the support, that the education is there, and we're hoping that these essentials that we create can provide some of that for them in a self-service kind of way. So when the commissioner said be aspirational, that is exactly what we're trying to do here, and a big piece is that workforce development.
And just noting where we started in terms of the early educator scholarship program for higher education, where we're really taking a look at all the resources the agency offers and thinking about how do we make those inclusive of our residential staff so that there can be a career pathway. So many similar issues to the child care workforce, right? Staffed capacity way below licensed capacity. How are we recruiting and retaining, and what creative workforce strategies can we bring to attract people into the field, but then support them to grow and build their skills while they're in the field and see themselves as having a career and a pathway.
Impact. Talk about impact.
Oh,
wow.
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Great to see you.
All right, thanks,
Thank you.
team.
Good to see you. Any other agenda items? I think
We have wound our way
Yes,
to
we
the
have
end.
wound our way to the end here. Thank you, everybody, for the adjustment on the agenda. Just as a reminder, we do not meet over the summer. We will have a retreat and then meet again in September. And with that, I would just wish everybody a great and healthy and safe summer.
Thank you.
Any other closing comments before we, with that, I'll make a motion to adjourn. Second?
Second.
Jamela, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Have a great summer, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.